in the heavy times.
Friends, welcome. My name is Sam Heath, and it's great to have everybody here. I'm with Equal Justice USA, and we're an international nonprofit, and we do work around community safety. And our goal is to think through when harm, violence, and crime happens, what can we do in response to that that centers healing and not punishment? There are all kinds of things that we engage, and this is a space that's a branch of a piece of the work called the Evangelical Network. And so, what that is we engage Christians and talk about things that relate to the criminal legal system and mass incarceration as a whole and think through what does this mean for Christians? What can a Christian response be to this? And that's part of what we'll be doing and talking about today. So, one term that I already used, and just to level set, is this idea of mass incarceration. And it's really important here in this space that we know that when we talk about that, the criminal legal system and its bigness, how mass or vast it really is that we see that really not as the problem, but as a symptom of something else. As terrible as it is, it's really rooted in something that's affecting and growing and building all of those things that we do in response to harm that aren't healthy. And that thing really is fear. And so that's something that we'll talk about here. And that's significant for those of us that are Christians as we think about the most repeated command in Scripture being do not fear. So, we're going to talk about a specific piece of the criminal legal system today and zero in on the death penalty, but especially look at and think about lethal injection. And so, I have a friend and a colleague here who's going to share about some of her work, and we're going to walk through some of these big and some of these hard things. So, before we get into that, a couple logistics. Again, great to have everybody here. This will be recorded, so you'll get the audio and a Spotify podcast link for this so that you can watch that again or share that with others later. If you have questions as we talk and as we share, at any point you can put those in the chat or you can put those in the Q&A feature. You can click on that down there at the bottom and we'll save a little bit of time to do that at the end. And then anything that we mention, whether it's a link or anything, if we put any links in the chat, we'll make sure to capture all of those so that you have those, and I'll send those out to you in an email after. So one thing I am going to put there in the chat is the link to our Facebook page. So follow the Evangelical Network and you'll be able to keep up with a lot of events like this and things coming up, discussions and conversations that we have. You also can click on that second link if you aren't already on our email list. And we would love to tell you about the work that we're doing and really even more than that, the work that others are doing. And that's the goal here as we move into talking with our guests today is we always say our goal is to engage and elevate the work of those that are in the justice movement. And Corinna Lain is here to talk about some of her work in a many years long journey and a foray into something that I think she didn't really expect. So, Corinna, in a sentence or two, if you can just say who you are, and then we're really going to get into the things. But I'm thankful you're here.
Well, I'm thankful to be here. Sam, thanks so much for having me, and hi to everyone out there. Corinna Lain. I'm Corinna Lain. I'm a law professor at University of Richmond School of Law. I'm in my 24th year, and I've been researching and writing about the death penalty for 18 years now, and just finished a 7-year long project that culminated in a book on lethal injection. And I think that's why I'm here.
Yeah, there's so much more to that. I wanted to say to people too, feel free. I saw a couple did this already. Feel free to put your name if you're with a group or an org or a church, but especially your location. It's always great to see in different places around the country where everybody is coming in from. Okay, so Corinna, let's dive into some of this and some parts of your story that you didn't mention. So I was thinking of phrasing it this way. So you're a Christian, you're a former prosecutor, and you're an Army veteran, but where you've landed are some of those things that you just said. So what are some of the threads of the story that got you into the world of academia that you're in right now?
Mm. I mean, I'll tell you, I had an encounter with the Lord when I was in the Army. I was a truck driver in the Army, joined for the GI Bill. And so and it wasn't in a church. I didn't grow up in the church at all. We weren't even really the Easter Christmas people. So, very much outside the church, but I had an encounter, and I was the Lord's from then on, and I can look backwards from that, or look forward and see how the Lord, has set my path. I'm a legal historian. I'm a constitutional historian, and when I came into academia, that's what I started writing about is Supreme Court decision making and legal history pieces. And I came across this decision, Furman versus Georgia in
Mm.
1972, where the Supreme Court struck down the death penalty and then brought it back in 76, ushering in the modern era of the death penalty. And I thought, well, that's an interesting thing that the court did in 1972. That's right in the middle of law and order.
Mhm.
And this is the Burger Court, not the Warren Court. And so I did a legal history on Furman. And then I did another legal history on the death penalty. And, the way the death penalty is, I think, is you start looking at it and it's really hard to look away.
Mm.
And I will say, for everyone, I grew up in Montana. And I always think Montana is really not that different from Texas. So I didn't think much about the death penalty, but I would say I was for it,
Mhm.
unthinkingly. And then as a prosecutor, I had a couple murder cases. I thought those were more tragedies actually, and but my specialty was child sexual assaults, so I saw real pain, boots on the ground. Um, And, but, and then too, when I was interviewed for the job, I was asked, do you think you could ask for death in a case? And I was like, oh, in the proper case, I could.
Mhm. Mhm.
Thank the Lord, I never had to do that. Thank the Lord, I
Mhm.
never did. Um, and, but I will say there are certain assumptions, I think, that come with support for the death penalty. Um, and I think there are things that good people on both sides of the aisle, if they knew, would be absolutely horrified, and it would violate some deeply held conviction. Now, for me, I came to be, my journey was longer. First, it was well, the death penalty is really messed up. They
Mhm.
better fix it. And then it was, well, they don't want to fix it, so
Right.
I'm not for the
Right.
death penalty. To understanding more intrinsically from the Lord the value of every human life. And that came in a piece in like maybe 2015 or 2016. And Sam, I have to tell you, I was talking to a colleague. He's a former Justice Scalia clerk, so he's
Mhm.
very conservative. And he said, yeah, we were talking about secrecy, and he said, yeah, it's really bad for the death penalty. He said, I don't know. I'm Catholic, but said, I don't know. I'm a good Catholic, but he said, I think they deserve it. And I said,
Mm.
I think the Lord would have spoken to my heart if really this was against the Lord's teaching. Within a week,
Mm.
I got a call from the Ohio State Law Journal asking me to do this piece on death row. And I did it. And it is in that piece that it completely changed my heart. And it was all the Lord. So it's a
Wow.
longer answer than you probably needed, but
Well, it's a journey and it's so different for
yeah,
everybody. And I think
yeah.
there's one piece of what you're saying that I think is similar for a lot of people, and that I think most people default to the death penalty being just accepted and okay. Some don't, but that's certainly for a good bit of history, especially the modern era, has been the majority opinion of the country. And slowly that's changing. But so many people start there and don't wonder or question or know. But then people start to see and learn and wonder, and that proximity is huge. And it's been a
Well,
big year with the death penalty. So much has happened just within the past year or so, with Biden commuting 37 of the 40 people on federal death row. We're going back a bit with President Trump in his first term executing 13 people. Last year, I believe it was 25 people who were executed. And right now, on May 21st, we're up to 18 people. So I believe there's three executions just within this week. We introduced nitrogen hypoxia as a new method that began last year within Alabama. So there are some states that haven't executed in years, like Tennessee, and others for over a decade have come back into play. And yet at the same time, executions are, as a whole, especially if we're looking at convictions, are down and changing. Public opinion is shifting. Over
Hmm.
half the country now questions that the death penalty is a fair and accurate thing. We've had 200 exonerations, right? There's all of these pieces of data, and it feels like a lot of competing stories. But what everyone I think can agree on is right now it's a wildly poignant time for the
Yeah.
death penalty in
Yeah.
so many ways.
Yes. I love that. It's funny because a lot of people have asked me about the Trump administration's day one executive order, let's
Yeah.
execute more. And one of the things I've said to them is, um, I know they're scary words, but they're words on a page.
Mm,
And the death penalty in this country, I say this as someone who has studied it for 18 years, at least the track we're on now, the death penalty in this country is dying for reasons that an executive order can't fix.
mm,
You know, when I think about the future of the death penalty, I look at, I mean, there are several different things, but two in particular. One is death sentencing,
hmm
because today's death sentences are tomorrow's executions. And without death sentences feeding the machinery of death, that machinery, the death penalty will die on the vine. And if there's any question about that, that is Virginia's experience. That is exactly what happened here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that has a lot to do with capital defense. But Virginia didn't have a new death sentence in 10 years. We had two people on death row. So we were just paying the millions for it. And then
Right.
it's like, okay, let's go. I look at death sentences, and death sentencing has fallen just over 80% in the last 2 decades. 80%. So, um, 2004, there were, I think it's about 125 new death sentences across the country. 2024, I think that number's maybe 26,
Mm,
something like that, 25, 26.
yeah.
So it's down 80%. Um, and it's down for reasons also that an executive order can't fix.
hmm
Part of that is actual innocence. Part of that is people understanding racism in the death penalty. Part of that is capital defense attorneys have gotten really good at not only understanding who these people are and why these things happen, but telling their stories.
hmm
Not so that they can walk. These people are never, they're never getting out. It's life without parole or death. But to explain, the prosecutor is saying, this person is, evil or a monster, and they're saying they're able to tell the story and document this person
hmm
never had a chance from the start,
Right. And so
and
many stories that are similar.
oh, so
As you
many,
look at
so
that
many.
in the trauma, there's such overlap. In so many other pieces. I mean,
Yeah.
and and you might say this later, but I always think about too, the biggest predictor of if somebody will receive the death penalty is the race of the victim. Meaning if it's a white person, that increases it more than almost anything else. So we know not just that the death penalty is something that's hard and for all the reasons you'll talk about not working, but we also know that racism is threaded through it. So there's so many parts and angles of this. And you talking
Yes.
about death sentences is really important as we talk about the narrative now that the death penalty is on the rise when we have to consider that the average person is on death row for 20 years. So the people who are being executed right now have been on death row, most of them for decades. So these are not recent death sentences, but you're right, it's drastically dropping.
I was talking to a capital defender in Arizona, and he said that he feels like the death penalty today is like cleanup on aisle five.
Hmm.
And he said the people who are getting executed today would never get the death penalty
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
And now, I think now that we're starting to understand time and forgiveness and redemption, um, but even if you don't have those things, time, you
hmm
have victims now saying, I mean, this is El Paso, saying,
hmm
24 people were killed. um, we don't want the death penalty.
Right.
And I'm sure that there were different views among those victims' family members, but basically what they said is this isn't good for us. Like this, you say closure, uh, really in reality, what it is you lost your family member, and now we're going to take 1, 2, 3 decades of your life.
Hmm.
It is the exact opposite of closure because they are tethered to this person, for that long. Their lives have stopped because they're waiting for the punishment. So, some of these, and then, even when the state goes for death, so this is Florida, a jury that understands and has a great capital defense team that can tell that story, they're not giving death. So, you know, I think it really is the case that it's got some version of cleanup on aisle 5. Those
Yeah.
death sentences are different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, Karina, I'll put in the chat here so others can see and take a look, and I'll email it out. But you had a
Ah,
book come out
yes,
on April 22nd, Secrets of the Killing
yes,
State, The
yes.
Untold Story of Lethal Injection. And what I've loved telling people about this is, and I put in the description for this webinar, is I said, what she's saying is that the story that we're told is that executions are safe, fast, a deterrent, easy, and humane. And more things too, but those five, and all five of those are lies. So I think let's maybe start there of that's the narrative that we still hear that lethal injections specifically, not just executions. People often will point specifically to lethal injection and say safe, fast, easy, a deterrent, and humane. How did you come to see that it wasn't that? How is it not that?
Mm, mm. Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question because I'll just tell you, I didn't want to write a book on lethal injection. I did not even want to write the article on lethal injection that insisted upon being a book. And I've been writing about the death penalty, and I did have part of this is a professional side, a research side, and part of this is a deeply personal side, but something that I, hope that I would be able to share with your audience. But on the professional side, as a death penalty researcher, we're all seeing these botched executions in the
Mhm.
paper. And it raised the question of, why are states so breathtakingly bad at this? Like
Yeah.
why that we know how to put down pets. We know how physician-assisted suicide works. We have surgeries where we cut people's chest open and, do all these things. So, why are they so bad at this? And so that started my question.
Mm.
Um, I started researching and I realized lethal injection is absolutely nothing like what I thought. And I'm sitting here going, oh, I'm supposed to be some kind of death penalty expert. How did I not know any of this? And if I didn't know this, then nobody else knows this
Yeah.
either.
Yeah.
So I started writing the article. It was supposed to be a law review article. That's what we academics do. And I got to the end of part 1 and it had 300 footnotes, and I might have said an expletive. It's a book. And I really didn't want to write a book,
Mhm.
particularly on this. And I set it down. And that was in January 2017. And sorry, December 2017. In January, I went to a law professor conference, and law professors are kind of geeks. And so it was like, hi, how are you? What are you working on? Like, that's just how we relate to one another. So I'm getting this question all over. And it was stressful because my world is publish or perish. What have you done lately?
Mm.
And I was stuck. And so after one pretty stressful lunch, I went up to my hotel room. I skipped the 1 o'clock session, whatever that was. And I got on my knees and said, Lord, I don't want to write a book on lethal injection. I don't want to do this. And I remember like laying out all the reasons this would be bad for me. It's going to take so long. And I don't want to, I remember, I don't want to be the lethal injection girl,
Hmm.
right? I didn't want to do it. And, but I said, Lord, if I thought this was from you, if I knew this was what you are calling me to do, that would change everything, just everything. If I knew it was from you, I would do it gladly. But speak clearly, Lord, because, if that's the case, speak clearly because I'm not inclined to do this. And I was nailing against the bed. And I just reached over to see if there was a Gideon's Bible. I didn't have my Bible or anything like that. And there was, and I just flipped it open and I took a picture of the upper left, which I actually sent to you. But the
Habakkuk,
no,
the Psalm.
this is Psalm 45.
Got it. Okay.
And there it is. That's a
Yeah.
picture. But you can see, that's the upper left. That's the first place my eyes went. And, here's Psalm 45. My heart is overflowing with a good theme. I recite my composition concerning the king. My tongue is the pen of a ready writer. I just went, what? And I took this picture and said, well, looks like I'm going to write a book on lethal injection. And I did. And just to kind of bring that story home, that's like the beginning. Once I had a draft, and it took 5 years. I wrote through cancer in 2019 and COVID in 2020. But, I had a draft, and I'll tell you, no one wanted it. I got an agent right away, and she was a very well-connected agent and sent it all over. I saw the emails back, and no one wanted this book. And there was a day, December 7th, when the last two presses said no. And I didn't understand it. I cried in my office, went home, packed up my stuff, went home, and got back on my knees and said, it's funny. I look back now and say, my prayer was not like, how are you going to do this, Lord? I know you called me to this and you've given me confirmation for the last 5 years. Like, I know I'm supposed to be doing this. It was more like the last two said no, like, it's not happening. So I don't understand what this is about, but I need to know you are there. I need to hear from you now. That was my like tearful prayer, was like, the dream is dead. I need to know you're still there. And I just opened my home Bible, the habit I had gotten into 5 years before. And this opened to Habakkuk, and I sent you that picture too. So, like, by the way, that's my couch that I was crying against in the background there. But imagine this, it opens to this page, top left, and the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables that he may run that read it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. But at the end, it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. Hmm. So I think, I didn't know how it was going to happen, but I knew that it was going to happen.
Mhm.
And, here all the trade presses said no, and Habakkuk said, double down, make it plain. I know they all said no, but don't make it fancy and send it to academic, like make it plain so that he may run that read it. And I wondered this morning, are your listeners, are your watchers, are they the ones that will run? Are they the runners here? But anyway, so I waited, and to make a long story short, um, I was at a conference in Puerto Rico and ran into an NYU press person. I had heard they had a trade press line. I asked her in passing, and she said, why, yes. And I'm the one who does it. And I think 6 weeks later, I had a contract with NYU Press. Um, yeah. And I guess I'll just share the last picture because I sent you three. Once that happened, all of these pieces fell into place, including a writing retreat for free in Rome. I was walking the Vatican gardens, talking to the Lord about Habakkuk and the call to write the book, and I'm taking pictures, and I go to take a picture of this fountain, and a white dove flew into my picture. It's just crazy. Um, so anyway, I had somebody say, "Well, it looks like it's photoshopped," and my friend who was with me said, "You don't know Corinna Lain. Like she couldn't have done this if she tried," and it's true. But man, it's a perfect picture. And anyway, so I don't know what's going to happen with this book, um, but I think something's going to happen with this book. And Habakkuk said it awaits its appointed time. And I first thought, well, the appointed time is going to Puerto Rico and meeting the person that would be my editor. Then I thought the appointed time is that it had a release date of Easter 2025, a year and a half before the Pope declared 2025 the year of the Jubilee. And before he declared ending the death penalty as a sign of hope in the Jubilee year, like way before. And that was NYU Press's choice. Um, and they're not a religious press. So I thought that's the appointed time. And now, with the Trump administration and more executions and the turn towards brutality, I think, I'm like, I don't know why, but I think this is the appointed time.
Mm.
This is the appointed time.
Mm.
Yeah.
So it's been 43 years that we've been using lethal injection. It's the most prevalent method of the five execution methods, if you don't count nitrogen hypoxia as the sixth, that are possible within the United States. How has it become the one that was the most prevalent in this time? And because you saying all of that about this being this time and it being unique right now, I'm thinking about, I mentioned earlier, states like Tennessee that have not had an execution in I believe it's over 3 years, and
Mhm.
yet here they are with multiple ones scheduled this year. But there's a great debate around the execution drugs and where did those come from, and why is it that people don't know? So how is it that this method, that is the most prevalent method, is also one that is often fought and botched and so shrouded in secrecy? And if Tennessee is a good case study for it, then let's talk about that. But how do we get to it's popular and prevalent, but yet there's so many issues with it, even right now this week?
Yeah. Well, when I said lethal injections, nothing like what you think. I thought there was science behind lethal injection. I thought, we're doing this. This is the same like drugs that we use for pets, and at least there's veterinary science or somebody, you know, read, I don't know, some sort of reports or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Surely some guy didn't just make it up off the top of his head. But alas, some guy made it up off the top of his head. That's a true story. I document it.
Yeah.
One of the things I say in the intro is I brought the receipts because the stories I'm going to tell you are are just almost unbelievable. But it was devised by Jay Chapman. He was the medical examiner for the state medical examiner for Oklahoma. And I'm a legal historian, so I traced some of the legal history, the debates in the state legislatures, and they were very, very worried about how executions looked. At the time, the same year, a federal district court in Texas had ruled that there was a First Amendment right to view executions.
Mm.
It wouldn't last, but nobody knew that. And so you had legislators talking about, how delicate the death penalty was because it was just brought back in 76. The country hadn't seen an execution in 10 years. So they were rightly worried
Mhm.
that the public wouldn't have the stomach for it. And in any event, someone later interviewed this man, who referred to himself, by the way, as an expert in dead bodies, but not in how to get them that way.
Mhm.
And in the interview, he said, I didn't do any research. I just thought about what might be what you might want to kill someone with. So I used two drugs. If one didn't, the other would. And then the interviewer said, why the third? And he said, why not? Why does it matter why I chose it? I didn't do any research. So, I mean, you start with that
Yeah.
premise of,
Yeah.
and I document, for example, Oklahoma, the attorney for the Department of Corrections Googled what drug to use. They chose midazolam, and this is from his own words. He said, I looked it up, I went online, I went past the WikiLeaks. That's what he said. And so you got to start with that.
Yeah.
Um, I thought there were doctors doing this. The people who, it turns out, the people who are pushing the syringes are actually non-medical prison guards.
Yeah.
So there's just so much. They can't get in the veins. These
Right.
people are aging and ailing. They have notoriously bad veins. So it's just like a plethora
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
reasons. But the other thing you mentioned was, but why is it so popular? And I have to say, Sam, my research question went from why can't they get this right to why are states sticking with lethal injection?
Mm.
Like, why? They can't get the medical professionals, they
Mhm.
can't get the drugs, they can't get into the veins. It's super delicate and error prone. It
Expensive.
costs, I mean, Arizona spent $1.5 million on drugs for three executions and it botched all three.
Mm.
Like, they are breaking state and federal laws. I document all this. They're getting sued by the pharmaceutical companies. I document that. Then they have to pay for the litigation costs. So it's like, and it's not even humane. They use a paralytic to make it look humane. Uh, or that's the three drug protocol. So it's like, why? What are they getting out of this?
Yeah.
And what I came to what I've come to, like, I'm convinced of this, but it's not that I can prove it, but it's like lethal injection only does one thing well, only one. The thing it does well is it makes state killing look like something else,
Mm.
and I came to appreciate studying executions that, when for life to end before the body is ready to give it up on its own requires force. I read somewhere the heart stops reluctantly. Like the heart, like our bodies have this will to keep living. And so it takes physical force, it takes violence to actually stop that before the body's ready to go on their own and on its own. And it's like it could be a car accident. It could be a homicide. It could be an execution, but it takes violence. And the thing that is special about lethal injection is it hides the violence,
Mm.
right? Like with lethal injection, you don't see the sight of blood. You don't smell the sickly smell of burning flesh from the chair. You don't have people gasping and retching like you do with the gas chamber or gas
Mhm.
masks now. It looks like this person just fell asleep. And I've come to realize, like, wow, that must be so important to the longevity of the death penalty. That must be so important to keeping the death penalty. And I think I understand why. I think it's out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
There's nothing to see. It's like there's nothing to see here, move along, right? We have busy lives. There's nothing when it goes as it's supposed to, there's nothing to see. And you know, when people think about the death penalty and talk about the death penalty in the United States and debate the death penalty, they debate it as an idea. It's
Hmm.
an idea that you agree with, you support it or you're against it, oftentimes on tribal lines. What's special about lethal injection is support for the death penalty is support in the abstract. Lethal injection keeps the death penalty abstract.
Hmm.
It allows the political uses to flourish while burying, hiding the brutality that executions inherently entail. Um,
Because
and I
this is
think
not
that's
where we
why,
began. Executions used to be public. It was a very
yeah,
attended thing in the public square. And then
yes,
as things start to shift and they start to go in some cases literally underground, it becomes very controlled of who's there. The curtain is literally pulled and closed and opened at certain moments, and only certain people are allowed within the room. And to your point, it's become this very distant thing for us.
absolutely. And I think I've got a law review paper in there somewhere, but I think of lethal injection. I don't talk about this in the book, but I think of it as the culmination of a long line of state attempts to solidify and maintain the death penalty by making it more and more and more invisible as
Mm.
it becomes more problematic. So, if you trace the long history that you're just talking about, why did it move indoors? Well, because there were some botched hangings in Michigan. They were like, we don't want the death. Oh, that's what the death penalty is. We don't want that. Right. So it threatened the existence of the death penalty itself. And the middle classes were seeing, how, the, you know, they were seeing how people were creating this rowdy atmosphere and were like, oh, that's so gross. Okay, let's just, before the death penalty goes, let's go ahead and hide this. And it's like lethal injection is the culmination of that. It's the apex of that. It's, it's privatization,
Yeah.
secretization to the extreme.
Now, are most states that are still practicing lethal injection, is it still the three drug protocol? And I'm thinking back if people have read or seen the movie Dead Men Walking, that's the three, right? One puts you to sleep, one paralyzes you, and one kills you. And I think that's the order of the three. Is that most states? Because I know some are just a one drug.
Yeah. It's about half and half now.
Okay.
And the three drug protocol, the states for years were like, they're putting you under and you don't feel the other two. And once the scientists started poking around, I mean, there was no science to back that up from the start, but the executions themselves created data points because you've got autopsies, you've got, the
Mhm.
whatever data they're keeping, when did they stop breathing, that sort of thing. And the scientists looked and said, that's not happening the way you say it's happening. This is not happening. And so I lay all that out, but uh, the states for a very long time said we could never use the one drug protocol. We could never do that. It's impossible in all of these ways. And then they ran out of sodium thiopental, and boom, a number of them went to the one drug protocol just like that on their own. Um, the benefit of the three drug protocol to states, and I think the reason that they clung to the three drug protocol for so long is that middle drug, the paralytic. And that drug is not just a paralytic, but it's also a muscle relaxant. So it relaxes the muscles in the face and then it freezes them that way. And so you're going to have this very calm, peaceful look, no matter what's actually happening. But it works from the outside in. And the last thing that is paralyzed is the diaphragm, which is the muscle that pushes air into the lungs. And so, medical experts that have looked have said, the sensation would be, like someone being buried alive. And we know from some autopsies where the veins are distended and it's like, we know that there's something very different happening
Hmm.
than what observers are seeing. But it's a chemical veil,
Yeah.
right?
And
Yeah.
it's not the only method that we're botching. I mean, just South Carolina had its third firing squad execution, and it was supposed to be three different shooters, three different bullets, and one did not happen, which extended the time. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing his name, but Mikelmati, I think,
Yeah.
was his name. And so there's other methods that we know are not going well. Nitrogen hypoxia of January of last year was the first one, and the eyewitness accounts that are published all over, including in the New York Times, were horrific in how they described it.
Horrific.
So it's not just this method.
Yeah. So the first execution, which was Kenny Smith by nitrogen gas, that happened right before the book went into production. And so I actually worked it in. So I talk about that because it's history happening
Right.
again.
Right.
That whole method was based on a 14-page double-spaced report, unpublished by three um, community college professors, none of whom had any medical training at all. And one of them said, we just did the best we could. We couldn't get any, doctors to talk to us. But it was so poorly done that it actually misspelled the name of one of the authors on the front page. I mean, and
Yeah.
so, right, it's not shocking. I do have something to say about the South Carolina botched execution. Of course, I wasn't there and I don't know what happened, but the state's response, of course, it was supposed to be three shooters. You should have had three bullet holes. There was only two. And the state said, well, two bullets went in the exact same hole. That's why you only have two. And when I read it, I was in the Army. I was actually an expert marksman in the Army, and I was a training NCO. So I'm not an expert now, and I don't study, that, but I have my own experience. And I was like, the chances that two different bullets from two people would
Yeah.
go in the exact same spot at the exact same angle, like, stop telling us ridiculous things and acting like we don't have brains. And part of this comes from the book where I just lay out again and again and again, this is what actually happened. This is what the observer saw. This is the autopsy. Here's what the state said. It's not true.
Yeah.
And one of the things I talk about in the book is the effect on the executioners. And so I have a whole section
Mm.
talking about, or quoting the executioners. And one of the things they said was, I'll paraphrase it, but one of the executioners said, by the time a death warrant comes down, we have lived with this person for a decade at least, if
Yeah.
not two. We know that they've changed. I hope we get it to talk about redemption, and maybe my epilogue, but we know that they've changed.
Mhm.
We know that they can be safely housed for the rest of their lives. Um, and we've gotten to know them as human beings. And then a death warrant comes down and we have to kill them. And over and over again, what they're saying is, you can't expect that not to have an effect on us,
Yeah.
And so one of the things I think about is, um, we're killing someone who killed, but 17 years later, 20 years later, they are not a killer. They killed. They're not the same person that they were. But who are we creating when we are asking others to kill in for a job, as part of their job? And one of the things I wonder about, I mean, again, I wasn't there, I haven't studied it, but I really, really wonder. The state didn't come out and say, oh yeah, one of the guns jammed. Nothing like that. I just wonder if one of those shooters was like, I got to do this. I got to do my job. I'm not doing, you're like, let the other bullets kill him. I'm not doing it. And even the other two bullets, you'll notice they went into the stomach. The person, the prisoner actually wears a target over their heart. And I'm like, it wasn't that far away. I could shoot a pop-up 300, meters away. Like it wasn't that far. They should have been able to get that. And I wonder there too if they're like, I'm not gonna have this guy. I'll shoot him, but I don't want to be the one that gets the heart. I don't want to be the one that killed him. I don't know.
Right.
But given the trauma, the extent of the trauma that these people are going through, and I think the firing squad is both, I can't even say most humane because it's not, it's not a humane
Yeah.
death, but it's the
Yeah.
quickest death. So
Right.
it's both like in the best interest of the prisoner. That's why they're choosing it.
Right.
But
And they
the
do get a
work
choice in some
they
places
do.
too. Let's note that for others, that
Yeah.
some states like Alabama and South Carolina, you can choose. Yeah.
But I think it's the worst for the executioners.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I've also, because I'm an optimist, I also think I hear a lot of people now saying, that's so gross, it's so brutal, and I'm like, yes, it is. The state is shedding blood in your name. And by the way, if you don't like that, if you think that's like super brutal, that's what the death penalty is.
Right.
It's just that lethal injection has hidden it and made it look like something else,
Hmm.
which has taken all of it's tried to bury the brutality of it.
Yeah. When it affects everyone. A few years ago, Oklahoma had scheduled out 25 executions at the rate of one a month, and they started that process. But yet you had officials within the Department of Corrections write a collective letter to the Attorney General and say, we cannot do this. We cannot keep up this rate logistically, and it's hard. And it has an impact and an effect on everyone around it, especially considering, like you said, that it's being done in our name. So you mentioned the epilogue. What is in there that's key that initially wasn't going to be in there, right? But this was
Mm,
this was so
mm.
important. It has to be included.
Yeah. It just goes back to like this is it's the Lord's book. It's not like the book, but I had written a conclusion. It was a good conclusion. I liked my conclusion. And my editor said, "Yeah, great conclusion. Why don't we scrap it? And I want you to write an epilogue." And this is my first book, y'all. So, I was like, what's the difference? What are you asking of me? And she said, I want you to talk about how this changed you. A deep dive into executions for 7 years,
Mhm.
walking in that darkness. How did this affect you? And I started writing. I was not even planning on writing about redemption on death row, but it just happened. I'm like, what did I see? I saw this thing that I wasn't expecting. And I just felt the need to share it. And it was about how, these people, they're not the same person that
Mm.
they were. And how, it's just, as I say, some of them are just broken people. And that's its own thing. They get wheeled into the wheelchair in a wheelchair to the
Mm.
execution chamber. They have to be propped up on a pillow because they're on oxygen, and the state doesn't want them to suffocate and to, choke and gas while they're killing them. So like, there's all of that.
Right, right. All the
For those
irony.
in Louisiana, they tried to kill a guy. I think he was 81 and he died first.
Yeah.
So there's this like debasement. Um, but then there's these other people that have found faith. And, it's not always Christianity. It often is, but they go, to their death praying to Allah or Jehovah or Jesus. The ones who are Christians often, not always, but I noticed it, start prison ministries,
Hmm.
and they're talking about, giving back. And so I was like, I think there's a line in the epilogue. And given this audience, I'm just going to tell you, I typed the line and it was like, I'm talking about them starting prison ministries. And I said, As Saul became Paul, so it is for many on death row. And I typed it and I was like, where did that come from? Where did that even come from? And I went over to my couch and cried because I was just like, the Holy Spirit was just like, I just had words that I wasn't really planning to write, and yet I did. And this case came across my desk, Bryan Dorsey out of Missouri. And this is while I'm writing the epilogue. I have a Google News feed, and this op-ed came across my desk, and it was written by a corrections officer saying, "We correction officers know Bryan Dorsey's changed. Don't execute him." And I'm like, "Okay, that's interesting. I'm going to read that." And they talked about a petition that over 70 prison, employees signed, staff and officers, including the two wardens,
Mm,
a petition signed to the governor saying, listen, this guy, Bryan Dorsey, he had been, convicted of a double murder. It's 17 years later, and they said he lives in the honor dorm of the prison. I don't know how a condemned capital murderer gets to the honor dorm, but he did. And he was the prison barber
mm,
over a decade. And he cut the hair of not only all the other prisoners, but by choice, uh, all of the prison guards and the two wardens. So it's like, imagine what that looked like, a condemned capital murderer with a pair of scissors and a razor blade at the warden's neck again and again and again. And so I talk about that, and I just pulled this up. Right after I talk about that, I quote the op-ed. The op-ed says, Mr. Dorsey is an excellent barber and a kind and respectful man. And they go on to say, taking Dorsey's life, I'm quoting the op-ed, taking Dorsey's life would be especially traumatizing for the many current and former prison staff members, myself included, who have come to respect and care for this exemplary inmate.
mm,
Well, the governor did not commute the sentence, and the people who had come to know and respect this man then had to kill him. And so, one of the things that I think about is for people, for an evangelical network, we're killing our Pauls.
mm,
We are killing our Pauls, and we're killing our Sauls who could be Pauls. When we execute, we're saying we know best. This person's irredeemable. This person, this person needs to go, and we know best. And it's like, but those people are the God specials, you know? Those are the ones that the Lord is like, you, you know,
mm,
because the
mhm,
deeper the despair, the worse they are, the more beautiful the testimony that they have.
mhm.
And so it's just, I don't know. I learned all of these things that I never knew, even, in all the years studying the death penalty, because as you say, I got proximate to it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, yeah. It changes everything. There's lots of great writers and speakers who speak of that word, but Bryan Stevenson of EJI talks about it a lot and says that we're more than the worst thing that we've ever done. And
So true.
it's a very true thing. It's a very biblical thing. And in the death penalty in every aspect, especially lethal injection, really works against that and really works just towards dehumanization in so many ways. Well, I want to point people to some ways to take action and some ways to maybe respond to this. And one, I'll send out to everybody who's here a link to Corinna's book because I want you all to get that and read that as well. But another option of a way to engage this, especially after learning about this, is to take a look at this link. There are national organizations, there are state organizations doing death penalty repeal work all across the country. There's 27 states that still can practice the death penalty and many national organizations that are working to support them as well. And so those are all groups that you can and should really consider reaching out to and engaging. And if you're not sure if your state has the death penalty, you can check on that list and see if and that may be a way of engaging some of this work. I'll put here again, would love for people to follow the Evangelical Network and join the email list so that people can hear about other things like this. I'll talk about next month's in a bit. I'll also point to that, Corinna, you've got your testimony talk where you give some pieces of it that are really specific to you and your life as a Christian. And then I'll put here also your book talk that you have. And again, I'll put both of those in the email, but I wanted people to grab them now if they had a chance. Anything else that you want to highlight for people to keep up with work and things that you're doing, Karina?
Thank you. Yes. So talk about a leap of faith. I am taking an unpaid leave in the fall, and I am driving around the country to talk to whoever will listen. And I'd love to do a testimony talk. You'll have the link so you can see what I would talk about in my story, and you heard much of it. But bookstores, I think I just really want to get this conversation started.
Mm,
We have narrowed down dates, and it's going to look like 30 cities in 80 days.
mm,
And mostly in the South, by the way, Bible Belt and the Death Belt. And
okay.
I'm doing a postcard campaign while I'm going to be driving through. And so I just got these in. There's the front,
Mm,
Stop State Killing. Here's the back, Secrets of the Killing State. And what I'm going to do, and by the way, NYU Press, I said, give me 1,000 of them. And what would happen if I printed a bunch of labels for the governor of every state that I go through? And I've still got to find someone to give me to figure out the postcard stamps. I might just end up doing that on my own. But um, where I've got a stamp and it's addressed, and then the person at the talk, if nothing else, write Corinna Lain, Richmond, Virginia. Like write your name and where you're from so that it's not, harvesting or some bot. But you could write pro-life is not
mhm,
pro-death.
mhm,
You could draw a picture of a cross. You could say, I'm a single issue voter. You could write whatever message you wanted. But I think, I think that these are conversations, really important conversations that have happened for a long time. I'm just an academic. I'm new to this on the ground type stuff, but I'm just telling you, right? Like the Lord told me to write a book, and I have, and amazing things have happened. And I do. I feel called to like drive around and talk to everybody. So I may be coming to a city near you. Watch out
okay,
for me. My book tour, once I get the dates, will be on my website,
great.
CarinaLane.com.
Great. Okay. Well, Karina, thank you for this work, for coming and sharing it. And it continues, right? The book is done. And now comes bringing that to people and calling them into places and spaces of action. So thank you so much, friend, for coming and sharing of your story. And I know that is costly in so many ways. So blessing on this endeavor and this journey, the literal aspect of it, of all of the cities. I hope that is really fruitful. And yeah,
Thank
we'll send out all the things so people can follow that and check and see.
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'll put in the chat and I'll send it to you all through email. We're continuing the thread of this discussion as we think about what is a way that Christians can respond and love and care. If it's not the death penalty, well, then what is it? So we're going to London, England, and there is a group there called Oasis Restore that runs a secure school, England's first. And their position is, can we create a space of restoration and care for those students rather than having them in a juvenile detention center or the equivalent that it would have in England? And they have some incredible ways of approaching children as we think about restoration. Again, there's some things that we need to end, like the death penalty. There are other things that we need then to turn to and to grow. And so that's one group doing it. So we'll talk with them next month and continue this thread of how can Christians think through all that relates to the criminal legal system? Well, we have some things to learn from England, and so we'll chat with them. Corinna, thank you so much again for everybody who's here. Thank you all for coming. We'll send you the recordings and all the info, but blessings on the rest of your day. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thanks, Sam.